Joining us now on the line from New York, New York, Brian Yorkey. He is the librettist lyricist for the Tony Award-winning musical
where the air is clear and cuts you like a knife. I miss the mountains. I miss the mountains.
That's the very talented Alice Ripley, who plays the mum in this piece and who won a Tony Award for her portrayal of Diana, the mother. I got to tell you, Brian, just for starters here, I went to this play a couple of months ago in Pittsburgh and knew nothing about it when I went in. I just knew that it won a Tony and therefore it was probably worth seeing. And you kind of fool us all off the top by making it seem like it's going to be any other crazy screwball comedy, and then it takes a real turn. Tell me about that, the importance of why you structured it that way.
Well, first, I think it's great that you went in not knowing anything about the show, because I think that's actually one of the best ways to see it. And we did that for a very specific reason. The lead character in the show, and obviously in the course of talking about it, we're going to give away some spoilers, as they say, but the lead character in the show suffers from mental illness. And it was, in particular, she's bipolar with a delusional component. And she, you know, it was very important to us in writing the show that we find some way of bringing the audience inside that experience. It's easy to look at things from the outside and have sympathy for what people are going through, or at least I think it's easy. What we really wanted was to try to bring about empathy, to have people actually sort of walk a little bit in her shoes. And so there are a number of sort of twists and turns early on in the show that are, I think, a little bit unsettling for an audience, hopefully, a little bit surprising, and let you know that maybe what you had thought was going on was not exactly what was going on. And in doing that, you know, we wanted it to be entertaining and surprising, but more than that, we wanted you to get a sense of how unsettled she feels and how sometimes what's going on in her mind doesn't match up with what's going on in her world.
Mission accomplished. Tell me why the play is called Next to Normal.
It's an interesting story. It was originally called Feeling Electric, and our producer, David Stone, felt that, especially as the show evolved and became much less about the particular treatments that she goes through, and in the case of Feeling Electric, that was inspired by the electroconvulsive therapy or shock therapy that she goes through. David Stone felt that the show was much less about that and much more about Diana and her family. And so we batted around quite a few titles. He actually came up with Next to Normal because he felt that, and we all readily agreed, that this family wasn't trying to be or having any hope that they could be any version of normal, any version of a cookie-cutter American family. But as the daughter expresses in the second act, hopefully they could be close enough to normal that they can live their lives without having to sort of struggle through one extraordinarily difficult day after the other.
Now, there clearly are enough people who suffer from mental illness, both in your country and mine, who, if they alone went to see this play, would account for great success. But clearly, your play has been successful crossing over to audiences who don't have any connection to mental illness. They just like the show. Why do you think people would be interested in seeing a play about something that most of us are, you know, quite frankly, ignorant about, or at the very least, scared of?
Well, I think that's one reason. I mean, I think it sheds light on an experience that many people have, but many more of us don't know very much about. I also think it's an emotional journey with a set of very interesting characters, but also very recognizable characters. Sort of a cliche to say they're people like us, but I think they are in very many ways. And to take the journey with them and have that emotional experience with them in the theater is special. And I also think that and I think that this was something Tom and I very much wanted to accomplish with the show. Even if you don't have this particular mental illness in your family or any sort of mental illness in your family, the way that this family deals with its past and its future and taking care of each other and trying to get through a day, we'll see ourselves in them even if we don't have that same experience. They function very much like many families do, and that's certainly what I've heard from all sorts of people who've seen the show, is that even if you don't have this particular experience in your background, the way that this family behaves and misbehaves is something that's very familiar.
You refer to Tom Kitts, the guy who wrote the music. You wrote all the words. People are going to wonder whether or not either of the two of you have some direct connection to mental illness.
Well, we both have people in our lives who struggle with mental illness, and I think that part of our wanting to write this and our wanting to get it right was that we wanted to do justice by their experience, and also that we wanted to understand their experience more ourselves. So certainly that was one of the inspirations for us, is people who we cared about who struggled with mental illness.
It is very, or at least certainly from my understanding, is very accurate and true to the experience, and I'm wondering whether you had to, beyond your own personal experiences, have to consult with psychiatrists or psychologists to make sure you got that accuracy right on.
Oh, absolutely. We did, first of all, a tremendous amount of research, and then we consulted with medical professionals all along the way. In particular, we had a psychiatrist and also a psychologist who read drafts of the show and gave us feedback, and we made very specific changes based on what suggestions they had and what really information they gave us. It was interesting, we said to them, going in, we'd like the medical professionals in this show to behave as competent, well-meaning medical professionals would. It's easier, I think, to write a show about a doctor who's incompetent and what a problem that is. It's more of a challenge, and I think more interesting, to write a show about what's really more common, which is a doctor who's very competent and very well-meaning runs up against a disease that he or she still can't cure. And that's often the case with mental illness. So our consultants really helped us get the medicine right, have the treatments be what they would be in each situation, and then let the civilian characters, as it were, make whatever good or bad decisions they made from there.
Well, let's focus on one of those civilian characters, so to speak. Alice Ripley is the actress who portrays Diana, and she was spectacular in this. I wonder what, in casting her, what did you think that she could particularly bring to this part? Because it is she's on stage practically the whole show. She's singing a lot. I mean, she's leaving her guts out there every night, and I guess 2 shows on Sunday, or however you do it. What did you see in her that gave her the inside edge for this part?
Well, we actually wanted to have her play this part from the first moment we conceived the show. It actually ended up being a number of years before we got a chance to work with her on it, but it was well worth the wait. She's a tremendously powerful performer. She has a powerful voice, a very powerful presence. She's a really compelling actress. What I think makes her specifically well-suited for the role, and the role for her, is that she's fearless. And she is fearless in particular about opening herself up on stage and showing us what her emotional life is. And I think there are actors who are very good at mystery and very good at stringing us along and giving us so much. And then there are actors who are able to give us everything. And they're few and far between, and even more so those actors who are courageous enough to do it in a show like Next to Normal, which, as you said, requires her to really open herself up and pour out her guts, 8 shows a week. And she does it, and she does it with a tremendous sense of truth and tremendous commitment, and she never holds anything back. I personally have no idea how she does it. I'm just amazed and glad that she does.
I want to be careful we don't give away too much here, because you're right. We don't want to spoil this for people who do want to come to it a bit ignorant about what it's all about. But having said that, the family reacts in a certain way when they discover that the mom is in trouble. Is that typical, the way the family reacts in your play? Do you understand that to be the typical way families react to mental illness?
Well, I think there may not be any typical, because I think every family is different. What I do know is that I've had, and Tom and all of us have had, many people who have mental illness in their families come up to us after a show or at an event or even on the street and say that we got it right, and even now and then accuse us of having hidden cameras in their house to know what they've been going through. So I think that in a sense, every experience is different, and this is not going to represent everyone's experience. But I do think that that it does represent what many families go through and the way many families react to someone, one of their number, who suffers from mental illness. And one of the reasons that's so is that as Tom and I were developing the show, we'd listen to people who came to us and told us their stories and talked about what their families went through, as many people did, and they all went into the show. That was very much part of what informed the writing.
And again, without giving away too much, is it your understanding that most families, when touched by mental illness, can't stick together? The marriages break up, the kids run away, whatever. They don't make it.
Well, I think that, the reality is it's very, very hard. It's, I think that even the best meaning of spouses and children and parents of those with mental illness can, over the long run, be discouraged and really be unable to continue, living with a person who's suffering from mental illness. I do think many people stand by their family members and do the best they can to make it work, but it's a tremendously destructive disease from everything that I've heard and learned, and one that is constantly changing and often intractable. And I think that it can get to a point with family members where the sacrifices they're making are really beyond what can reasonably be expected of a person.
Normally when you ask somebody a question about one character's relationship to something in a play, you're talking about a relationship with another character. But in your play, Diana, the mother, has a relationship with medication that is as important, I guess, to the plot line as many of the relationships she has with other characters. What's that relationship with the medication like?
Well, she has been really kept stable on and off for over a decade and a half in the play with medication. And it is through medication that she's able to go about something like a normal day and take on sort of the challenges of everyday life without becoming incapacitated. At the same time, there's a trade-off with her medication that she is not necessarily feeling the same contours of feelings that she would be without the medication. Of course, that makes sense. And in some respects, that's as it must be. And in other respects, I think it's difficult for her to go through life not feeling all the things that she once felt.
She asks a very powerful question during the course of the play. You wrote the words, so I'm going to read them to you, and then I want you to tell me what they mean. You wrote, "What happens if the medicine wasn't really in control? What happens if the cut, the burn, the break was never in my brain or in my blood, but in my soul?" What are you trying to say here, Brian?
Well, I think she's asking a question, and I'm intending to ask a question more than make a statement. But I think the question is, where exactly do these feelings reside? Modern psychiatry and psychopharmacology and psychology have made huge strides in treating mental illness, but I think that most professionals would agree that there's still more we don't know than we do know about these illnesses. I think it's true of neuroscience as well, and I don't know that much, but did a little bit of research working on the show, and there are tremendous strides being made in identifying brain chemistry, brain electricity, the way the brain works, and how that relates to things like depression and schizophrenia and similar mental illnesses. And I think that those strides are all tremendously exciting, and there are treatments that are very effective in many ways at helping people manage these diseases, but none has yet cured one of these diseases. And I don't think any of the treatments has truly helped us to understand how it is that our brain, our body, our souls come to these places of great mental injury. And I do think that, there is an ongoing question about what part of these things resides in the matter, the tissue, the blood, the chemistry, the circuitry of the brain, and what part of those things might be something beyond that, something that's spirit. And I don't have an answer to that question, but I think it's a question that is compelling and worth asking.
We've got a few minutes left in our chat here, and I want to see if we can sneak one more clip in, then I'm going to come back with another question. Michael, if you would, roll tape.
Catch me, I'm falling.
Unresolved loss can lead
Catch
to
me, I'm
depression,
falling.
fear of loss to anxiety.
Flying head first into fate. Catch me, I'm
The more
falling.
you hold on to something you lost,
Please hear me
the more you
calling.
fear losing it.
Catch me before it's too
Depression,
late.
anxiety,
Catch me before
depression, anxiety.
Catch
One
me
gives
before
rise
it's
to
too
the other.
late. Catch me,
It
I'm
becomes a
falling.
cycle.
Catch me, I'm falling. Catch me, I'm falling.
It's interesting watching these clips, you know. Of course, I saw it as a play, but it looks like it'd be a pretty good TV show, too, with the interesting way it was shot. I want to ask you, just in conclusion here, a bit of an odd question, because you know as a writer, you've no doubt heard that many people think there is a link between your personal creativity as an artist and, you know, depression, anxiety, whatever. Do you think that link is there?
I certainly think there tends to be a correlation in creative people, that creativity and mental illness often appear together. But my freshman psychology class taught me in no uncertain terms that correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation. So I think that often these things show up together, whether one gives rise to the other or one depends on the other. I don't pretend to know. I know for my part, I certainly think that I am hesitant to mess with my brain chemistry or my personal psychology, and probably to a fault, where a little clinical intervention might help now and then, because I do wonder if that is also something that would affect my creative instrument. And I think many artists feel the same way. But that's a particularly sort of personal and very poorly educated view of it. So I would say there certainly seems to be some sort of correlation there. What the true relationship is probably goes back to that question of what lies in the brain, what's in the chemistry, what's in the circuitry, and what's in our soul. And I think that's a question that we're probably a long way from knowing the answer to.
Understood. Brian, your play starts in Toronto on July 19th at the Four Seasons Centre for the Performing Arts, Next to Normal. Tony knew what she was talking about when she gave you guys so many of them. That's a great play, and we're so grateful you came on TVO tonight to talk about it. Thanks so much.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. Thank you so much, Steve.